Hi, and welcome back again to the Front Row Back Row podcast. I am Dr. Owen Campbell, owner of Simplify Motion Physical Therapy in Phoenix. And with me is Dr. Brian Wolf, owner of Evolution PT and Fitness in Connecticut and Long Island. How you
What's
doing
up,
today,
everybody?
Brian?
I'm good, man. How are you? How's everybody?
I Hey, they're good. The kids are back to school slash camps.
It's
You
great,
might
isn't
hear
it?
my dogs in the background, but
That's all good. It's
other
all
than
good.
that.
Kids back to school. It's the parents' dream. You know what I mean?
Oh my God. I pay them whatever they want.
Exactly.
Take
Exactly. Exactly.
All right. So we'll just get right down into it this episode. Today we're going to be talking about how to get new patients. So this is pretty much everything on my mind right now. Someone who just opened their mobile cash pay practice about 3 months ago. And what I am finding is that all right, and sorry, we had a quick audio difficulty. But I just started my own practice about 3 months ago, and I am definitely in the stage of trying to get new patients by any means possible. Now, as I mentioned, I hate to define physical therapy clinics by how they take money, right? You're not a cash pay contractor, or a credit card only contractor, right? Or a credit card only UPS guy. But in our world, in the health insurance world, you kind of have to, they're two very different animals, right? So from what I understand, with cash pay, a lot of it is about marketing and making sure word of mouth is strong, and that the product that you're giving is really hitting where the customer needs. Versus with insurance world, all those things are important too, but maybe the way that you get your business is more from at least at my scale, more from like a physician's office, a good relationship with a physician, because they see almost only insurance based clinicians. So I just have a few questions more for you, Brian, because you started your career out with what I'm doing, right, with the cash
Yeah.
pay, and you do a lot of what you're doing over at Evolution cash pay. Um, I'm just, from a perspective of like, you know, go switching from that insurance marketing, which I was good at when I was working for someone else, and taking insurance to cash pay. Like, what would you say would be like probably the number one thing I should be mindset wise looking at?
It's a great question. I think it's the number one thing that I would tell people, and I would say it now, is not being afraid that patients aren't going to come see you, right? Like there are definitely, I think, in the first time in your career right now versus insurance, you're being thrust into a sales role, right?
Hmm.
So
Yeah.
so essentially there's a skill set, and I love this quote that I've learned, but there's if it's not achieving some form of success of where you think you should be going, it just means you don't know the tools or have learned the tools to figure it out yet. And I
Okay.
said that in a convoluted way, but in essence, it's like I think the difference for a lot of physical therapists when they're in the insurance model, and they're like, I'm going to go to cash based, and I'm going to make one social media post, and we'll talk about social media later, and then everybody's going to come see me, and they're not going to give a crap about any of the insurance stuff. It's like that's just not how it works, right? Like the
That'd be
reality of it
nice.
is it would be sweet if it was. It'd be like that would then it'd be done, right?
Yeah.
But the reality is you're changing the paradigm as to how people will pay,
Yeah.
and so therefore what you're being thrust into is also a sales role.
Yeah.
And so this and the aspect of objections as to why someone won't buy a product are
Hmm.
really down to like four things. And one is money, right?
Yeah.
Two is time, and then
Okay.
three is really trust of the product itself,
Okay.
right? And how it's being delivered. And then the four is kind of this bucket of like nonsense of I don't trust the company around it. So I tell people it's like finance, the trust of you, the trust of the company is a real
Okay.
big three, right? And so I think what happens in this case, it's like, well, if you take my insurance, well, I already like the company a little bit better, and the money just got better, right?
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
that's the difference. That's the difference. Whereas here, now all of a sudden, I really got to trust you,
Yeah.
And so I think one of the things that I know that marketing does with cash is the other crutch that I don't think is great for people to work on is, well, hey, if you've been to these, crappy physical therapy places that take insurance and they've worked there and had bad therapists, like you should come see me. It's like,
Yeah.
well, their threshold might even be low, like be higher in terms of like, well, I've been burned once. What do you mean now I got to pay more money to not get burned again, right? Like, what if I get double burned now, right? So,
So
I
their trust will be harder to earn.
for sure, for
Yeah.
sure. I
Okay.
mean, you're you got to think of it as, it's funny because Jordan Belfort has this idea, the Wolf of Wall Street, right? Has this
Yeah,
sales tactic of like the straight line method. And one of the things he talks about is there are certain people that are easier to, easier to sell than others, and their
yeah,
thresholds on the he calls it the tenants, right? So the tens, and so the idea behind, time, the time, the person and the company, and how that aligns. Like the advantage you have is you are the company,
yeah,
right? In this
yeah,
stage. So the
yeah,
good news is you just got to lower that threshold. So
yeah,
ultimately, what you're looking to do is when you're trying to acquire patients, I think the biggest thing is, for someone like me, I'm looking to get patients in droves now. I'm looking
yeah,
for high schools. I'm not looking for one athlete,
yeah,
right? I'm looking
yeah.
to get in touch with, like, we just onboarded an entire high school yesterday. So
Oh, there you go.
it's like I got all these coaches, but like I need them in droves like that,
Yeah,
like at this point of the scaling, versus like, for you, you're just looking for that one person.
yeah.
So the scaling difference is I don't need the high school, I don't need the MD that's going to flood me with patients. I just need the one right now.
So focusing on that trust, either as a big company like you, where you have all the different channels that you communicate with, either the public or your main referral sources or your patients. But for me, I mean, social media can be a nice way of doing that because
Yeah.
it's free, first of all. But then I'm finding, like you said, word of mouth is a great trust provider, right? If you have somebody telling you, hey, do this. So, strategy, I think that fits into your, because I agree with you completely when we look at the main things of money, time, and trust, right?
Yeah.
um, Money obviously is going to be a problem with cash pay. If you already, most people will have an insurance that they're already paying for. Why should they pay you more, right? So you really have to ratchet up that trust, right? Um, and I think a few things that I've done, right, is I've really tried to make sure that my website's professional. I really tried to make sure that, when I am on social media, it's a company thing. It's not my own Instagram where they can just scroll through and see me on a beach, partying at your wedding. Uh,
Yeah.
um, like things like that. Uh, and I think that, I guess the hardest thing I'm trying to wrestle with is I know it takes time. I know word of mouth takes time. How do I know what I'm doing is working? Like, how do I not just sit and say, because I know big companies, especially, I'm sure you probably have some analytics on this, but I'm just tipping my toe into like Google ads, right? I'm just tipping my toe into like Facebook ads, and I know they come with some analytics. But like, is there any way that you can kind of tell just on the ground, like, hey, I'm doing okay?
Good question. So I think there's a macro and a micro, like so like to give you a bigger scale aspect of that is if you quit, then you failed, right? Like that's how I
Well,
look at it overall,
yeah,
right? Number one. So that's like
yeah,
the grand scheme, right? So as long as you don't quit, you're winning.
yeah,
Two, it is on the flip side. I think that when it comes, there are ways to measure it. A really good number to try and learn is your cost of acquiring a customer.
okay,
So your cost of the CAC or cost of acquiring a customer would be what you're spending on marketing dollars
yeah,
and what you're directly getting back. And you
okay,
can measure that, daily, weekly, and monthly,
okay,
and then quarterly. And I think that's a good thing to think about.
okay,
And in essence, if you're looking at something like that, so say I'm spending, on Google, right? To your point about Google ads and that stuff.
yeah,
And we're kind of talking about social media and how this works. So
yeah,
I think overall, there's a couple different ways to look at it, right? Because you've got this website and how you
yeah,
can drive people to your website.
yeah,
What's great about organic social media is it really creates a lot of authority. So by
okay.
creating a lot of authority, it shows how you are different than other PTs.
Can you define that, by the way? I know we have this might be something we could just jump to right now, but you said organic social media, so I'm assuming there's an inorganic,
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
So
Yes.
what do you mean by organic versus inorganic
Good
social media?
question. So organic, the way that we describe organic social media is organic is me just posting. Zero
Okay.
dollars. Cost me nothing. It's free, right? I
Yep.
post on social media, post on Facebook, LinkedIn, TikTok, you name the social media platform, right?
Yep.
Organic would be me walking around handing out flyers.
Yeah.
Where it becomes inorganic is when I had to pay for those flyers,
Okay.
right? As soon as I have to pay for it, it's inorganic.
Okay.
So
So paid
because
ads, paid
yeah,
ads would be inorganic. Organic
exactly.
would be you just having a really funny reel, right?
Exactly,
Okay.
exactly. Because
Okay.
this is what, and by the way, this is the other part. Ironically, I would actually tell people who are just starting out at some point is to figure, and we can talk about this more in depth,
Uh,
is that, and because you're asking this question, how do I know
yeah.
it's working? Really,
Yeah.
what you're asking me is, how do I know that for every dollar I put into marketing, I get back 10, right? Like
Yeah.
that's really what you're asking me.
Yeah.
And so that's the key. And that's a bigger answer than just systematic.
Yeah.
I think when it comes to, the aspect of the inorganic versus organic, it's ironic because actually if you look at someone like The Rock, right?
Yeah.
Or you look at someone like Conor McGregor, or
Yeah.
you look at someone who has these huge, Kylie Jenner is a great
Yeah.
example. Their organic social medias are so massive
Yeah.
that this is why they're like billionaires, right?
Yeah.
Because they can go and they can just do a post about The Rock with Terramana, right?
Yeah.
Everybody, so he can just go and talk about tequila, and he
Yeah.
can reach 350 million people in one organic post. We have to pay for that, and to pay for that would be more expensive. So
Yeah.
that's the difference. So you can have the same reach Dwayne Johnson has, except you
Yeah.
got to do it inorganically.
So with that then is say I get a few customers or customers patients, right?
Mhm.
Um, and I build and then I spend a few, here or there. So where would you say my first dollar should be, right?
Good.
My first few bucks, because I'm pretty witty, gotta say. Great face for social media. No, I'm kidding. Great space for radio. But the inorganic stuff, I don't have the time to put into that. I don't have I wasn't there early enough to get the reach. So like where would you say I should spend my first? Where would the new cash pay practitioner spend his first dollar, right? Or her first dollar?
So if you were to ask me this, and I would tell anybody this in
Yeah.
our space in healthcare in general, the number one thing that I would tell people is actually not to go into social media and paid organic, right?
Okay.
I wouldn't, and the reason I wouldn't go into social media with that dollar is because it is harder to measure, and it's a very easy thing to burn money, right?
Okay.
So when it comes to like the marketing and the levels of where I would go, and the question is going to be at what those thresholds are, right? And
Yeah.
payment wise. I think the first place I would do it is this is where like community events are really great.
Yeah.
In terms of BNI, that's a
Yeah.
great or networking groups. Like we've talked about BNI before. BNI
Yeah.
is an organized networking group. I've utilized it. It has given me God, I mean, the compounding effect on it's crazy. For me this
Yeah.
year, I mean, it's forget 10x, it's 100x now. What I actually get out of it in terms of the
Okay.
return on investment. So you're not going to get that with social media, right? Now
Okay.
the difference with social media is you're going to turn on the spigot, and it's an endless thing that goes without you actually having to do anything, right?
Okay.
To me, the in-person guerrilla marketing, anything like flyers, cards, putting money in the website, right? Putting
Yeah.
money into your website, I think is going to
Yep.
be a good way to do it. Because here's the
So
thing,
more like search engine optimization, that type of stuff.
yeah, I think
Yeah.
SEO
Okay.
is a really good way to look at it because if you can do, and for those who aren't familiar with set engine optimization, it just is how quick organically you show up on Google faster. So to your point about or paid ads on
Yeah.
Google, if you just get your SEO up, and so imagine if you
Yeah.
spend $15,000 on a really nice website that got your
Yeah.
SEO to a point where I type in physical therapy Arizona and you're in the first page,
Yeah.
that's very valuable because in theory it's going to cost you a lot less money in the long run. And
Okay.
so you factor that into your cost of acquiring customers, but I also think that's like startup costs. It's just
Yeah.
part of doing this, right? So,
Yeah.
I think when you think about that,
Well, I'll tell you, I spent $100 on a WordPress
yeah,
website
yeah,
because that's
yeah,
all I had.
yeah, and that's fine. You know what I'm saying? And
Yeah.
like, so like you can start there, and like you can
Yeah.
acquire like because if you think about it, say you start a WordPress, and here's the thing, right? And to go back to your original question about like what would you, if you're a solo person? I remember
Yeah.
my wife when she was starting when she started that practice, I was like, when you have 13 patients coming in per week, not even
Yeah.
13 new, 13 visits or 13 this,
Yeah.
like you're going to be successful
Yeah.
because you can cover your overhead plus you can take X amount home. And so it's
Yeah.
like if you can do that on a consistent basis and figure out that number, what you're doing is you're outpacing your cost requiring customers.
Okay.
When you get sticky is when you start to add marketing dollars and you're not covering your cost requiring customer. What
Yeah.
essentially doing is that's where you're doing ineffective marketing to answer your
Yeah.
question.
Okay.
So that's why it's a really good statistic.
So
and
looking at cost of acquiring a customer, right, is probably the number one metric that I should go for.
yes,
And then if we're the listeners in the audience that are, trying to open a cash pay practice, or maybe they're a few years in, they might be looking more now towards scaling. Right.
yes,
So we're going to have some people listen to this that might be 2, 3, 4 years in. They might be saying, I got to hire somebody. I got to pay for that person, which means I need more business. And I think we touched on a lot of the things that you would use and you have used in your practice to be able to build up that volume, right? To be able to support those people. If that's the way that a practitioner wants to go with scaling. So I guess then the next question that might hit a different segment of our audience, maybe the people who've been doing this for a little bit, is what would you, once you kind of have your name out there, once people are following you on Instagram, now what do you do? How do
yeah,
you get it so that you can get, like you said, not just a player, get the whole team?
yeah. I think the hardest part of this is the jumps, right? When you start,
Okay.
I used to, like the story that I joke about all the time is, I'll never forget sitting in a car in a golf course parking lot down the road from my house, because I was like you, I got two little kids,
Yeah.
and I was terrified to give someone $125 a month to manage and grow my website and build a custom website for me.
Okay.
I look back at that and I joke about, I'm like, really, that's what I was nervous about, right? Because the jumps, they just substantially get scarier each time. It
Yeah.
never stops getting a little scary. And that's part of the bravery test. And like I said, don't quit.
Yeah.
So when it comes down to, scaling and
Yeah.
growing, I think what ends up happening is you've got to have a plan as to, again, you want to have a plan on, if the first person to hire is to have someone who can help you monetize and help you be more efficient.
Okay.
So, like, I would definitely say, depending on someone's practice, what you want to do is also have an understanding of, when you have the idea of how to acquire a customer, like, here's
Mhm.
how I acquire them, right? So here's how I get leads,
Yeah.
right? But here's the offer that I have with physical therapy, and here's how much money I make from that offer.
Okay.
So let's take the national, so the statistics that people need to know, and knowing the numbers. Say someone were to say to me, like you were to say to me, I got three new patients a week, or I got three new patients a month, and the lifetime acquisition of how that person comes on per month is about $1,000.
Okay.
So if your cost for acquiring that person is $150, right? Let's keep it
Yeah.
round, $100.
Yeah.
We can say that you're going to get $850 per patient you acquire,
Okay.
right?
So patient is worth $1,000 at 10 visits, something like that,
Yes.
and it costs $150 to get that person in the door. So the revenue from that would be 850. Okay.
Yes. So in essence, what you can do is figure out what's your critical capacity of what you
Yeah.
can get to, right?
Okay.
And the idea is, at some point you're going to have to take a salary cut yourself to pay that person more money. There's
Okay.
been many a times where I paid more physical therapists who work for us more money than me, right?
Okay.
And the answer is because the long time growth is then they can continue growing the business. And as
Okay.
long as you can maintain that, that cost requiring customer and that product,
Yeah.
that can be very effective. You
So
know what I mean?
one of your first, so what I'm hearing you say is that actually who you hire is probably one of your best marketing strategies to make that jump.
Yes.
And as a physical therapist, so, and we can always talk about the hiring process and everything in another episode. But for those listening out there, that's something that, it's making that first critical decision is pretty important. So the characteristics you look at for somebody like that, is just someone who's more driven. They want to be able to understand the business side a little bit. Some of those, they kind of understand that they're part of the team. And what it I think you hit a really good point here, and this is what I used to do when I was managing bigger clinics, right, in the insurance world when I was a regional director, is that we would place a premium on somebody who understood that we all are part of a team to grow this business, not just one person's the manager, I'm just the PT.
Yeah.
You want clinically focused people, right? But at the same time, it's just that much more of a value add. One of the things that I always kind of noticed when I was interviewing people, everyone would say the business focus because they look at me as management, and they want to say that because that's something that sounds good. But I would always kind of follow up with like, okay, well, what would you do? Like, how would you run the place? Like, even if it was a new grad, maybe I'm sure they've had experience. One of the things I love is restaurant experience.
Yeah, yeah,
Great customer service.
they
You
are.
have to sit there and say, I know I am terrible and the food is terrible. You are right. Uh, um, but like, those are my little tricks that I would use to try and find somebody that would be, kind of more business focused, right? That you wouldn't have to be having these conversations of like, well, we do have to make money to keep paying you.
Yeah, for sure.
um, so like those are some of the things that I found grew our clinics, right? It was when you could either have a director that was like that or a director that could hire that way. If they could hire that way, my God, it was that clinic. You get two or three clinicians like that. It doesn't matter who I was, right? It wouldn't matter who our marketing people were; they would do it themselves.
Yeah, I think it's a really good thing for you to highlight there because I think one of the things, the mistakes that I made as we were growing was, bringing on certain physical therapists. We looked for the quality of the physical therapist, how good they were,
Yeah,
but they didn't have that. They weren't looking to drive and grow with us in that business. And
yeah,
and so what ended up happening was and then COVID happened, right? So when
yeah,
something got tough, the issue, and it's not, the other part is, to your point, one of the things you didn't answer and you didn't ask, say in there, and I'm going to throw it in there, is it's not always about money in our profession, right? There's no
oh
one
yeah,
making $1 million a year doing this. It's more
no,
of a, so like the margins are not that huge.
yeah,
We've joked about this internally that even a margin of $10,000, while it sounds like a lot when I say it, really
yeah,
is only $800 a month, right?
yeah,
So it's like we can find other ways to make that money. You know what I
yeah,
mean? And so when you
yeah,
think about it, so it's like, in essence, I'm not saying that physical therapists should take, less money to do this, but in theory, if there's a quality of life thing, if there's a, oh, if there's a way to grow myself, if there's, there was a guy that I heard, a cash PT, who was like, I did like an internship, so I
yeah,
brought on a physical therapist who I taught how to start his own practice. So that's tough because you're bringing on somebody to scale your business, but they're going to leave. But if
yeah,
you could start like a sports residency type of deal, like a cast residency is what he started. He was able to
yeah,
bring on PTs and track talent that way by saying, because he was able to bring them value. So
yeah,
what's the value that I can bring that person? So that's definitely a scaling opportunity. And then when it comes back to, kind of to bring it back to the marketing side of it,
yeah,
it's why I think initially I would tell people, do boots on the ground marketing first, learn that, then get the social media ripping to the point where you're like, all right, now I feel confident that I'm doing what I'm doing is correctly, because at least the boots on the ground can help you pay for some of the social
mhm.
media stuff, right? And so you
So
can do that.
when you say, so clarify what you mean by boots on the ground. Do you mean like where I'm at, where I'm just starting and I'm interacting with everybody, or do
Yes.
you mean like, okay, all right,
Yeah, so I would say when you're interacting with people, you're trying to accelerate word of mouth, doing the word of mouth, and it sounds
yeah,
slow. It sounds slow because it is slow, right? It's
yeah,
time. It's you're trading your time. So you're trading your
hmm,
time for money. That's what you're doing,
okay,
right? This whole profession is that. And
yeah,
so ultimately, what you're trying to do is maximize your return on investment with all of
yeah,
the types of marketing you're doing, but you also want to be able to measure it. And so I think it's a challenge when, just realistically, when you're trying to juggle 10,000 different things, it's
yeah,
easier to measure your return on investment on your cost of acquiring the customer based off of the aspect of like, I'm going to this networking group and that cost me X amount of dollars per year, month, day, whatever, right? If you break it down that way. And so
yep,
that if you're acquiring those customers and then you're saying, okay, here are the people that I have that I'm selling and this is what I'm spending, it allows you to figure that out a little bit better.
yeah,
So I think those are the aspects of that. So I think it's more of, and again, I also encourage people, like, as soon as you see some form of success, there is a leap of faith you got to take, because there is
okay,
a point of like, I'm gonna have to spend $50 a day on marketing
hmm,
on Facebook. And
yeah,
if I do that, no, it's going to be $1,500 a month that I'm like praying to God I'm getting that. But again, if you think of it though, think
yeah,
about the cost requiring customer.
yeah,
If I get two customers out of that,
yeah,
I just got 2 to 1 back on my dollar.
yeah,
So, like, to your point, I think everybody thinks I'm going to put one post up and I'm going to get 10 patients. The reality is you're paying for thousands of eyeballs to see that to get two
yep,
customers.
yeah,
And so that's the difference. And if you can do that
yeah,
consistently, and then in theory, if I put $100, I should get 4 customers, right? And
yeah,
and 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 so on. And that's how you can scale your business. And that's how you can confidently bring on somebody and be like,
yeah.
I can get them busier.
Well, and that's that old adage, right? Like you go, you're young, you see a see a lovely person across the bar, and you buy them a drink, and good lord, you probably strike out about 10 times, but
Exactly.
one time, might have found your wife, or
Yeah.
husband.
100%, 100%. And that's why I
Yeah,
think the conversions on sales is like 10%, you're killing it,
yeah,
right? Like
yeah,
if you've got 100 leads and you
yeah,
get 10%, that's 10 new clients. We would
yeah.
take that all day long. And I can tell you like
Yeah, when you put it
1,500,
that way,
yeah,
it's totally like, oh yeah, because you think about it, right? If I charge, a few hundred a session, right?
yeah,
Um, and I can have somebody who comes for the typical PT number, in 9, 10 sessions, or hopefully not that much, right? I'd like to be better than typical, but um, that's God dang near a few $1,000. That's a lot
yeah,
of marketing I could buy, right?
100%,
That's just one
100%.
person, right? So, when you look at it that way, it does make me a little less hesitant to spend the money on those kind of inorganic ways of building yourself up. And then hopefully, you can find some time to do something organic so you don't have to spend all your money.
Yes.
Um, but okay, so then as we kind of go through this, you as a bigger company, you're looking more than to say, okay, we because we're bigger, we have to have a presence. We have to have a social media presence. People have to know our brand. So you're more willing to spend social media money without that sort of immediate understanding of how much you're going to get back from it. And then like I guess from that perspective, you talked about getting a whole team versus an athlete, right? So how do you go into a conversation? Say you're a practice owner with 1, 2 rock star therapists. You're killing it for 35 hours, hopefully a week. So you have a little bit of time to work on it. You got 5 hours in that week. What meeting are you trying to get? What way are you trying to spend that 5 hours to, at least if it's marketing, right? Because obviously there's other stuff business owners have to deal with. But if you're like, man, I really got to market, tough times coming up, it's the holidays, I got to get more butts in the seats. How are you spending that 5 hours?
The hard part here is when it comes to like I got one or two other physical therapists working for me and they're seeing patients and so are you. The
Yeah,
hard part is you got to step away. Like we were talking about kind of on the last episode is like you got to step away a little bit so that you can go and find those clients
okay,
for the rest of the practice. Because the hardest part is like, and then again, we have like 13 or 14 people on our team. Bringing on that high school, I had to hire somebody else. So
yeah,
like, but the reason I could onboard that person was I had three other people who understood our system, understood, and I didn't have to onboard. Imagine if I had to onboard all four of those people at once. It'd be
yeah,
brutal. And then especially when you're at that aspect of like, well, I'm a solo, I'm a PT, then I got two other PTs with me. All
mhm,
three of us can't take that on, right? So like it's also how to get to those next levels with it. So
yeah,
I think what's interesting is also creating your model in terms of like to your point, are we taking insurance? Are we taking cash? If we're doing cash, what are our cash streams? Like, how do we create more revenue streams? Right.
yeah.
So,
Because with
every,
cash, you're gonna have to focus on marketing more.
yeah. Well,
Yeah.
you're going to, I mean, no, the businesses are no different. If I
Okay.
stopped focusing on marketing, we wouldn't have any customers, regardless
Okay.
of insurance. Right. Because I
Oh,
get
sorry.
stumped. Yeah. No, no, no. But
Maybe
yeah.
more like social and direct to consumer marketing
Yeah.
versus through like
So
big
this is
fish.
actually, so now you're kind of segueing into another interesting conversation, which is the old adage of physical therapy. Like, right. How many times have you heard it? Go to find doctors, right? You said it, find
Yep.
doctors, find doctors,
Yep.
find doctors. I
Yeah,
drove to like,
that's what I was trying to say. Do I go to a doctor's office? Do I go to
yes.
a basketball game? Like, what do I do to get those
Do you
people?
know the statistics on how many people go to a physician's office, any physician, and
Yeah.
walk out with a referral of physical therapy is? Do you know how many people?
How many, like a physician or like an
Like what the
orthopedist?
percentage? So no, not an orthopedist. So any physician.
Any physician. All right. So
Yes.
I'm assuming, the dermatologist isn't going to be given too many. Wound care, maybe, right?
Mhm.
Burns. But I don't know. Maybe out of all of those, I'd say 10,
They said
maybe.
7%, right? So
Ah,
they say
close.
so that's actually pretty darn close, right? So say it's 10%, right?
Yeah.
90 other percent of people are walking out of that without one.
Yeah.
Right? And so the reality is direct to consumer marketing is going to be so key in
Yeah.
private practice. I don't even want to, because to be honest, I think this is my business and your business is very similar to yours. This is why direct to consumer is so important because we're like I tell Bill all the time. For me, it's the hospital based and the physician based clinics that are my competitors. The other private practices in here, we're all in the same battle. We're battling those guys. If those guys went out of business today, we'd all be inundated and need to hire like 20 physical therapists, right? So it's like it's more about because they have such a cornerstone and referral network with orthopedists. So when we get one or two, that's gigantic for us. You know what I mean? The problem for you right now is, say you were to get an ACL, they're going to be like, well, I want to use my insurance because I'm going to need several different visits, a lot of visits. So that's the
Yeah.
hard part of that, right? So it's just trying to figure out like where your niche is. So I would niche down, have your marketing message really consistent, making sure that what you're doing is putting out, good quality content on organic marketing for authority purposes. Inorganic is then saying, all right, I'm gonna spend money on boots on the ground stuff first, like going to community events and introducing myself to people, going to networking groups, trying to create relationships that will create some referral streams for me. And because for someone like yourself, like talking with social workers right now are great referral sources for you, because those are people that are out of network a lot, and they're working with high anxiety, depressed. There's different people that are having those issues, but they're paying cash for that. And so they usually have some sort of physical ailments as well, and they're going to pay cash for physical therapy too. And they're not going to want to be in that like churn and burn type of physical therapy practice, right?
Yeah.
So that's
Yeah.
the thing. Like they're going to have that. So that's where I think there's some differences in that, and how you can create that. So that's the
Okay.
idea. So
Yeah, and that's where I think when we come down to it, there's so many good examples that you gave of like different settings and different things, and I'm sure we'll in future episodes we'll break out things for the cash based clinician, this that the insurance based. Do you have a lot? Do you have a little? Those types of things, because my God, I could. I'm sure we could both talk for days on how each one of those affects, right? Um, but I think for the purposes of at least this podcast, um, getting to know kind of how do I get that new patient. I think you covered a lot of really good points. I think it comes down to that first thing you said. Like you got to figure out how to leverage your money, time. How to basically not leverage your leverage your money and time, but also you have to figure out, okay, a customer wants, they care about money, they care about time, and they got to trust you, right?
yes,
Either you, like me as the individual cash therapist coming into their house, or you as multi-center clinic, right? So when somebody's looking at any point of the continuum, right, of being able to say, okay, how do I do this? How do I spend my time? How do I spend my money? Right? You got to kind of figure out for you what your practice does, right? Am I someone who takes all the insurance as possible? Money for that patient may not be an issue, right? But they're going to care about time. Do they have to drive a long way to get to your place? Do they trust you, right? That you're not going to commit insurance fraud. All the way down to me, where money is a big part, right? So focusing on all of those, keeping that in your mind and then applying it to your practice, right? I think you gave good examples on how to do organic versus inorganic marketing, right? I can tell you right now, I do not want to try and become an influencer. I think that is a massive hill to climb, especially now that Instagram's kind of been around forever. But I do have a few good ideas of like what to do inorganically, right? Like spend it maybe on Google ads, social media. I think you mentioned not the greatest understanding when you only have limited dollars, but maybe when you're bigger, right? It might be something that you just kind of have to do. And then really just kind of looking at it and basically saying you got to figure out what works, and you got to try, and you got to keep trying, and you got to understand that you will fail 9 out of 10 times.
yes,
But if it works, single, I had a patient tell me this, is like every single no is the next step towards the next yes,
yes,
right?
exactly.
And I thought that was a really great thing. He was an old real estate agent, right? But hey, he's driving a nice car, so he's got to be right,
Yeah, exactly, exactly.
right?
Well, I think the big takeaway too that in fact, when we were planning how to talk about this episode, that I didn't think about, that I think is really important based off what you're just talking about. I would
Yeah.
encourage anybody who's listening to this, anybody who's starting, is figure out the number of what is the cost of acquiring a customer, because
Okay.
I think
Oh yeah. Yeah.
that will decrease it will decrease your risk threshold for what you need to spend. Because
Yeah.
if your cost of acquiring customer is 120, 150, 180 bucks, then
Yeah.
okay, like that's not a big deal. I can spend that because now if it's $2,000, you realize there's some marketing you got to rework,
Yeah.
right? So
Yeah.
it's like if it's $100, if it's less than $100, like whatever that is, do a lot of that. spend a lot of money on that, right?
Yeah.
Because in
Yeah.
this
Yeah.
case, if you're going to see, because if you're spending less than $100 and you're doing your first sessions $100 and you're going to sign them up for a 6, 8, 10, 12 package thing for physical therapy, or
Yeah.
like a gym membership or some sort of subscription thing. Like that's the thing we should talk about that on here is how to brainstorm a subscription based thing reoccurring for physical therapy because to
Oh
me
yeah. I know a
that
few
would be a
people doing that.
monster. That would be a
Yeah.
monster, but it's trying to figure out how to do that, like how to do
Yeah.
wellness check-ins. And so I've just never been able to figure it out properly, but that's a really good model for cash-based stuff. It's why gym
Yep.
memberships work so well because if you can get recurring stuff, people love
Yeah.
recurring. And so you
Yeah.
can also that model because you know it's coming on, you can scale that nicely.
One
That's
medical for PT.
yeah. I mean, it's one of those things where like
We're not
again,
we're not going to release this episode because we just came on $1 million idea.
exactly, exactly. Well, that's the idea. The idea would be how to do that. It's just how to structure it properly. Then what's the offer? Then find the leads, and then sell it. Right. So it's like
Yeah.
that's the other word. That's the Alex Hormozy line that I love about him. Is like he just
Yeah.
finds. He's like, here's our slam dunk offer. Here, getting the leads that we can talk about our offer, and then we got to learn the sales tactics to sell them.
I love
And
how over the course of an episode you got from like Jordan Belfort, who is like
yeah,
a felon, to Hermosi, who's like
he did his time. He
business.
served his time.
Yeah, right.
Yeah,
We'll all hear it coming out in 10 years. No, I'm just kidding.
exactly, exactly.
All right. Well, that I think is where we're going to wrap it up. Brian, thanks for your time, and yeah, everybody. I guess catch us on the next one.
Yeah, man, that's great. See you next week. This was
All
awesome.
right, man. See you.
See ya.